sports. Craig Melvin is up next right here on MSNBC. Craig?
Hey, Andrew. Good afternoon to you, and good afternoon to you as well. Craig Melvin here at MSNBC headquarters in New York on another busy Tuesday. About face, President Trump weighing whether to send thousands of U.S. troops to Afghanistan, going back on a previous position that we should, quote, leave Afghanistan immediately. Also this afternoon, blame game. The president taking to Twitter to deflect attention from Sally Yates' testimony about Trump ties to Russia. And bubble burst. Former President Obama sharing a long list of things that he does not miss about the presidency, including living in what he calls the bubble. But let's start with President Trump in Afghanistan. Thousands more troops potentially headed for a combat role in America's longest war. One of the big revelations of this plan still being formulated, more power for the generals to determine troops levels. Let's head immediately to our reporters right now. Chief White House correspondent Hallie Jackson at the White House, Hans Nichols at the Pentagon, and analysis with Naveed Jamli, Dana Milbank, and George Will with us all on a Tuesday afternoon. Hans, let me start with you. Tell us a little bit more about the plan and how it differs from President Obama's strategy.
Well, it's namely a directional shift, right? Obama was clearly winding down the war. He wanted to end up with around 8,400 troops. That's what's there. And this is an indication that they're going to be winding back up. Now, it's not a drastic increase. It's not the kind of increase that Obama, frankly, did when he came to office. He had a variety of policy reviews. They ended up doing more than 30,000 troops for what was called as the second surge. I think one thing we need to be clear on all this, though, this is still very much in discussion. Administration official just told me, Craig, this has not gone to the policy committee yet, at the principals committee, at the National Security Council yet. So it gives you a sense that they're still very much deliberating over this. And that gets in the second question, the overall number of troops. There's so many numbers being thrown around out there in terms of how many might be NATO, how many might be U.S. I think we should shy away. We've heard up to 3,000. I think the important thing is the direction, and that this marks a shift in the direction. I think that's the significance, along with what you're saying, which is to say more empowerment for ground commanders. But we've seen that in Yemen, we've seen that in Somalia, and we've certainly seen that in Syria and Iraq. Guys?
Hallie, what's the president hoping to accomplish, and how is he explaining the change of heart, if you will, or is the White House bothering to try and explain that?
Let me take the second part first. The answer is not yet, right? We haven't heard from the president publicly since this started to come out that he is seriously weighing these new options in Afghanistan and looking at the various presentations that have been given him so far. We expect to hear that from Sean Spicer sometime in the next hour. It will likely be one of, if not the first question posed to the press secretary here at the White House. Let me answer the first part of your question now about what the White House hopes to accomplish here. Sean Spicer was asked about that and answered that question with more questions, Craig, which is an indication that there is still some hammering out of strategy going on, at least here on Pennsylvania Avenue, right? You know that the administration has talked about wanting to protect U.S. national security interests. That is a priority, and that is how they answer the question on its face. But then there are more questions of how do we make that work? How do you end up removing troops fully from the country after you do stabilize it, if and when that happens? What you are hearing from the administration is we're still working to figure out what those options are, which is why that question is still out there, Craig.
President Trump also tweeting up a storm in reaction to the Sally Yates and James Clapper hearing around this time yesterday. What are we hearing from him about that?
You said it, tweeting up a storm, right? After the Sally Yates hearing, there was a question of, hey, how's the White House going to respond to this? Again, more questions about that today. You can see some of these tweets. Sally Yates made the fake media extremely unhappy today. She said nothing but old news. Director Clapper in another tweet saying, reiterated what everybody, including the fake media, already knows. There is, quote, no evidence of collusion with Russia and Trump. And then adding, the Russia-Trump collusion story is a total hoax. When will this taxpayer-funded charade end? Let's be clear that the hearing focused on Russian interference in the election and Mike Flynn's role and what Sally Yates warned the White House. That's real. That happened. Chuck Grassley was just on talking about how there is new news coming out of this hearing, talking about how Sally Yates went to the White House, came here twice in person to talk with counsel Don McGahn in his office, just her, him, and two other staffers, to explain why she was concerned that Mike Flynn was compromised by the Russians. Mike Flynn remained in that position for 18 more days, and that is a question now. What happened in those 18 days? How does the White House explain to the American people why Mike Flynn remained in that position for more than 2 weeks after that first warning came out from Sally Yates, Craig? So a lot of reaction coming out here. You've heard it from, for example, Chris Murphy as well over on Capitol Hill talking about this too.
Naveed, Russia is your wheelhouse. Let's talk really quickly here about the testimony yesterday. What did you learn from Sally Yates, and perhaps even more importantly here, what did you not learn from her yesterday?
Well, I think exactly what Hallie said. The burning question on the tip of my tongue is why, if the White House was informed of this concern. Look, I'm sort of agog why Flynn was even hired in the first place, knowing that he was fired by a previous president. But that aside, why, once the president was informed, assumingly informed by McGahn, that there was a legitimate security concern, the specifics don't matter, but once he was informed there was a legitimate security concern, why did he decide to keep him in place? I mean, that is a question I think the American public owes an answer to. And frankly, it's one that Sally Yates didn't answer, and frankly, she shouldn't have answered. But that is the big question. Why was he kept in place? And I think the answer for that, frankly, Craig, is going to be a political one. I think the president was faced with a question of if he cut Flynn at that point, it would have been simply to justify the concerns that people had about his connection to Russia. So, you know, I think he made a political decision, and he kept someone who potentially is a security risk in place for almost 18 days. And I think the American public is owed an explanation as to why that happened.
All right, Naveed Jamli there. Naveed, thank you. Let's turn to the politics of all of this. Two opinion writers for the Washington Post this afternoon, George Will, who is also an NBC News and MSNBC contributor, and Dana Milbank as well. George, let me start with you, sir. This is President Trump on Afghanistan in late November of 2013. Here is his tweet, his often preferred method of communication with the masses. Here's the tweet: "We have wasted an enormous